Oh, hey all, and welcome back. And I have a surprise for you. Well, it's a surprise for me anyway. I just got delivered Kingdom Core Class Optimus Prime. It's actually supposed to be come to me, a couple weeks ago, and then while it was supposedly out for delivery, Amazon sent me an email saying, oh, it's been delayed. Well, here we go. Already received some packages today, and then suddenly it says 10 stops away. So here we have them, Optimus Prime. And this is the current packaging for the Kingdom line for the Core Class. You have the illustration here, basic test, text. Pretty consistent with the design choices they've made for their packaging recently. The back shows you what we have. No bios, nothing extensive. Just here's Optimus Prime. You know who he is. Now let's get him out of the package and see how he compares to everything else. Before we get into the comparisons, let's get to the meat of what this figure is. And my initial impressions are, one, I like this guy a lot more than I thought I would, because I knew that it was going to have some limitations due to its size, but he does look really good. Two, the closest example I could compare him to, for anyone who's not handled him, is a shrunk down Combiner Wars figure. We have those fixed slit ankles for the wide stance poses. We have a little bit of hollowness, and we have a fairly simple transformation. To me, this is like they shrunk down what would have been a deluxe class size Combiner Wars figure. Not that's a bad thing. I enjoyed the line, though the plastic does feel a little bit nicer than what was used in that line. So let's go to articulation. We have ball joint in the knee, ball joint in the hip. The only concern, they're tight enough to hold everything. These might get loose over time because the hip already feels like it doesn't have as much resistance as the knee. So you might have to use some furniture polish or something on those ball joints after a lot of use, but currently it seems to be holding up. Then I wouldn't call it an ab crunch, it's part of the transformation, but if you really wanted, you could make it like an ab crunch. He has sort of a nice forward position, but what it is separating right there. Then there is no waist articulation as far as that goes. We have a pivot at the shoulder, then a ball joint, then we have a ball joint at the elbow, and then the hands can be folded in due to transformation. There's also little pegs here that you can fit these smaller types of pegs on. Head rotates. Seems like it's on a ball joint, or maybe something similar. Has a slight wiggle, but I wouldn't call it any kind of up and down posability. But as far as robots go, it's really good looking. The only thing that I think mars it is this little flap that you see from the front. And if you look here, it's actually split where if you wanted to, you could probably pop it out. I'm not going to pull it out right now, but you could probably pop that off if you just wanted to display him in robot mode and then put it aside for other uses. Now let's get to his transformation. Head pops in, has a little flap that covers it up, which cleans up the look. We can move this down, rotate the chest. The trick is getting everything in just the right order. So we can flip the hands in. And we want to get this part lined up and locked in. And then before we put the legs in, this part is just going to fold in here. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because some of these joints are tight and they only move certain ways. So yeah, we want to get that in there. And for being a Legends toy, it's actually pretty well engineered. A more complicated transformation. Complicated yet simple, if that makes sense. And there's little pegs on the thighs that help lock it in here. And there we have our truck mode. And what's kind of neat, if you notice, he has a fifth wheel back here for possible trailer. Not likely, though. Third party could do something, but these feet are going to be a problem. And that's probably what I'm going to go ahead and say is my biggest gripe about this. Even with this sort of elongated truck mode, which is not the worst truck mode they've made. It's really skinny and it's really tall, and you have this here, which at least they molded into the plastic. So if you wanted to take a silver marker, you can come through and paint this part and the bumper, and then maybe put a red stripe there, something along those lines. It is not the worst truck mode they've ever made. but it's certainly not brilliant. But if you're just wanting a little desk toy that's neat to play with, it rolls, it looks kind of neat. It's definitely Optimus Prime, but it's not going to be sort of this. I mean, you're not going to compare it to a Deluxe. You're not going to compare it to a Voyager or Leader class. This is what it is. It is a neat little playable Optimus Prime figure. So let's compare this to a couple of Takara-made figures. First, their last attempt, which isn't much better, isn't much worse. It's a truck. I'd say the only benefit that this one has is it has the fuel tank and it has the steps. This does not have. From the front, you know, it's your choice what's better. Of course, they're different sizes. This one's a little bit bigger, so it sort of lends itself to a little bit better engineering as far as transformation goes. Then we have the Kabaya model kit, which is directly inspired off the G1 figure. A little bit shorter, but wider. So it's much better proportions, but that wide chest is definitely going to make it look boxier and more retro, where this is a bit sleeker and more modernized. So I think for what it is for a $10 little Legend style figure, this is a suitable truck mode. Brilliant? No, but suitable. So one thing I wanted to bring out here just to sort of experiment with, before I'd gotten this, I'd actually picked up a trailer from a yard sale with intentions of using with this. And this is a pretty common brand. It's actually on the bottom here. MAISTO, I believe. It's kind of hard for me to read, but you can see it there. So if you run across these, it actually scales pretty well if you were willing to do some painting and customization. And now this one being so yellow, it'd be a lot of work. Maybe not worth the trouble. And of course, I have to 3D print a rear trailer. But I bought it as an example, and I might look on the web online and see if I can find other trailers by the company that are comparable. You know, the wheels are a little bit bigger, and of course the hitch doesn't fit right away, but if you did cut off the end, it would fit in the hole, and it does clear the feet. So that is an option if you're wanting a trailer for this guy. So now, let me go ahead and get into a series of comparisons that we can kind of go through quickly and see how this guy stands up against other Hasbro figures and as well to third-party figures and things that we might be able to use this guy for. So first thing I want to do is let's take Core Optimus Prime in his profile truck mode and put him up against some of the other contenders or similar size figures. So there we have Legends, and we have the IDW Legends, the Kabaya, which really isn't a true comparison, but it's in the same kind of size scale, so it gives you some ideas. Then we can look at some third party, or, well, one of them's third party. This is the Thunder Manus Corebot, and then there's this monstrosity. So I'll say this beforehand. This is actually one of my favorite Transformers Optimus Prime robots, but it is one of the absolute worst truck modes. And I know it looks like he was in an accident or he's not fully transformed. That's as well as this thing holds together. It's got a lot of die cast in it. It was already a bad truck design. It sacrificed a lot for the robot mode, even though there's some really cool engineering ideas in there. But that's for another time. It just, okay, for the size, this is really not that bad. Once we've sort of seen what the options are, the truck mode's not bad. It's a little tall. It could be a little bit better, but all in all, it's actually pretty good. So you can see the front of how everything looks here to sort of get an idea to see how he compares to other things in his size. Now, what I'll say about this core class size is that this is not really going to scale well with Legends or maybe even Micromasters. It's going to be this sort of in-between thing that I think's really meant only to play on its own. But one thing I do want, before we go back to robot mode, one thing I want to show is even though the THS truck is awful, and this doesn't snap on, so this would be just for display, this is actually a good trailer option to put on there. And THS 02 has actually come down a lot in price these days. It's less in demand than it used to be because they reissued it. So if you're looking for a third-party trailer and you're willing to spend over 50 bucks, there's an option for you. Plus, you get an awesome Optimus Prime with it. So there's that. So here he is with a wide range of primes that fall in this size category. So we have Legends Prime here, IDW Prime. This is the Kabaya G1 Optimus Prime, which is also nice to see how he compares to the G1 aesthetic. This is the THS, which of course is definitely not in the price scale because it's a die-cast, super fine detail figure, but it's not much bigger. So you kind of see where this $10 figure is getting you compared to this, $60 to $120 figure depending on when you bought it. But looking at these and looking at the price point, you can definitely see this is a strong figure and really worth looking into if you're wanting something in this scale. Here are a couple other Hasbro offerings. This is the Red Optimus Prime with armor, and this is the Sentinel Pen Optimus, and while I'm not turning into a truck, it is actually one of the most dynamic small Optimus Primes. So that gives you another sort of figure scale to sort of compare it to, and you see how it's kind of designed and how posable it is. This is something that really holds up. Had it had ankle posability, it would be pretty close to as far as the Sentinel one goes. And here's how he scales with some other Hasbro legend-size figures. So I think he looks pretty good with Shockwave, but when you bring in the more modern mini-bots, the scale doesn't work quite anymore, which is why I'm sort of pointing towards this is sort of its own thing in random figures you find. I mean, you even go back to Power Core Combiners, look how much bigger this Huffer is than him. So that's another thing to consider if you're wanting to scale with anything. And then lastly, the current line of mini bots, where they've kind of upscaled even more, it's a no-go. So unless you want to be in sort of this Bizarro world, it's just not going to work. Now, one thing that's kind of cool are these KO oversized figures that are based off of old legends. Other than these kind of massive hands, I actually like the idea of this towering Megatron. I always like sort of, even though Prime is this powerful Autobot, that Megatron is this dominating force, which is why it's taken so long to defeat him. And then lastly, let's look at these MicroMaster bases, where I think this is a good fit. It sort of has that effect of, he's not quite as monstrous as you might see from the old Atari video game, where it was Optimus Prime versus Tidal Wave, but it still has that towering effect, which I think is pretty cool. And since this is a base, I think it works well. And since I have Airwave out here, let's go ahead and see how this vehicle mode scales with his base mode to sort of give you an idea of the play factor we have here. While yes, he is bigger than the Minicons, and he is a little bit big for this, I still think it works pretty well. So if it's something in the line that I feel could be cross-played and compatible, and a nice mix right here. Now that we've seen all the first-party stuff, let's go ahead and see how he scales with third-party type things. So here we have the Corebot Thunder Menace. We have Rager here, which I think scales pretty well for this Huffer. We have the Iron Factory RC, which I think is just about perfect as well. So I think these are two good figures that scale with this. We have the Jetfire, also from Iron Factory. Quite a bit bigger, but if you're looking at him in respect to the other line, especially if you look at even the Siege line, he is a behemoth compared to the main figures. And lastly, even though this isn't a Transformer, I think that this is a good match, because even though GoBots were always dinky in comparison to Transformers toys, if we think about the scale of a jet and the robot, this probably scales a little bit better than we do get if we compare it to the Leader Class figure. And lastly, I want to bring in the Leader Class figure itself, because this is the design that this is sort of shrunk down from. You can even see the fake little knee things here that is on the main figure. It's got the same sort of ankle tilt, the same feet design. You see all these little minor details. The main difference, though, other than the strange backpack, even though it is in the same place, having the bumper in the back like that, is he has slightly better proportions than the Leader figure. The Leader figure has these really long legs, and having the way the bumper is, it makes him seem even longer compared with his short torso. So he's actually better proportionally. But either way, it is a Legends version of this figure, where in the past it's always been sort of a departure from the main line. It's always been sort of a different design or a different take to make it work in the Legends engineering. And it's sort of nice to see this carry through. And then, of course, you can see on the back, there's some similarities you have here on the shoulders, the way those are mounted, even the little piece there. It's different, but it's similar. And here he is with Siege Omega Supreme, which is a really good fit. Even better so than the Voyager and Leader class figures we got. And another thing I want to point out, and of course do this at your own risk, you can see how streamlined his midsection is now. I popped this off. It's just held on with a little clip. You could risk scratching the paint. There's no paint on this area, but if you're careful, you should be okay. But like I said, at your own risk. And by taking that off, especially if you're not going to transform it, you're just going to fiddle with it, it does improve it. And even though a lot of accessories do not work with him due to the size, it is cool that the blast effects from the Siege line works on the end of his barrel, and he has a port for a Figma stand, so you can get a lot of flying action poses, which kind of makes up for the fact that he doesn't stand super great. And I know this might seem like a long review for a Legends Optimus Prime, but it's a really solid figure with some minor gripes. And those minor gripes would be things like the handle here. The gun does look a little bit funny. And it doesn't take the standard 5mm peg, but I'm okay with that because the hands look so much better. Even has a port here. I do wish there was more options to put on weaponizers along those lines on him, but that's just not the case. Maybe we'll see an armor down the road or whatever. Other nitpicks would be the way the back is here. It would have been nicer if there was one more joint to where these could have folded all the way up, but that's a minor gripe. The other nitpick would be this doesn't grab the best as far as that goes. So if he's just being displayed, it's not so bad, but it will become an issue as you start posing his legs and stuff around because it pops off pretty easily. The final nitpick, and I think this is probably the biggest one, is the feet. I think either having a heel that came out or having ankles that were adjustable, which of course would have been nicer for the vehicle mode and other things, he is a little bit back heavy. He's just going to fall backwards because his feet stop right there and he still has more weight going past the center mass. All in all, some minor qualms. I think it's a pretty cool figure. If you can get it, especially at the price point it is, it's definitely something to pick up and keep on your desk and play with. But like always, thanks for watching. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we'll see you all next time.